Okay, so we're going to start now. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Colombia conversational panel, and thank you so much for attending. So today we're going to be talking about the current situation in Colombia, what's happening, and the importance of putting this debate in the international arena. So I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name is Alejandra Moreno. I am a project leader in Multicultural Sweden, the organization hosting this event together with the Swedish Development Forum and with Peaceworks. Thank you so much to our partner organizations. And now I'm going to tell you the agenda for this event, and then I can introduce our panelists. So first of all, we're going to start by a quick context of what's going on in the country so that you can all be, as the audience, that you can know like this background of what's happening in the country and eventually understand what the panelists say. Then we're going to have a brief discussion with the panelists. So after this context I'm going to do in this short introduction, I'm going to ask each of the panelists some questions according to their expertise, their knowledge, and where they're standing from. All of them are from Colombia because we think it's very important to raise the voices of the Colombians in this situation and listen to what they have to say. I myself am also from Colombia. After this discussion, we're also going to talk about the importance of these international discussions. And at the end, we are going to have a brief space for the audience, for the people to ask questions to the panelists. You can do so through the Zoom chat. And Matilda from FUF, the Swedish Development Forum, she will help us read them to each of the panelists. So that's the agenda for today. Thank you again for being here. And then I'm going to start with this short introduction of the Colombian context. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see. Okay. Yes. So we're going to start with the question, what is happening in Colombia? So the 15th of April, the president of Colombia, Iván Duque, and its government, they launched a new tax reform law to the Congress to eventually be voted and analyzed under the name of Sustainable Solidarity Law. Why did the government launch this proposal of the tax reform? Well, there were like three main points where this came from, and they said, yeah, it is very important to have a tax reform precisely during these times in the country. So the first one, the government said, was the economic crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, as it has happened in many other countries in the world itself. But in fact, in Colombia particularly, these last few months and this last year, Colombia has had its worst performance in more than half a century in its economy. It has decreased in 6.8% its economy. And this is absolutely connected to the poverty rates given by DANE, the National Statistics Department of Colombia, where it states in 2019, the poverty rate in terms of monetary poverty was 35.7%, while in 2020, when the pandemic started, this rate increased to 42.5%. And this is manifested in 21 million people in the country living in poverty and 7.4 million in extreme poverty. These numbers I just gave you are out of 50 million people approximately that Colombia has, which means around half of the population, even a bit more, is living under poverty circumstances. The second argument the government gave of why it was important to launch this tax reform was the huge increase of the public spending. So the government said, we have been using a lot of money of the public spending during this last year because we needed to adapt the country for the challenges that the pandemic brought. For example, adapting the health sector, the educational sector in general, many sectors that have been touched by the pandemic, everything, right? Like life has changed as we knew it before. So that was the second reason. And the third reason was the exponential growth of the external debt in these last few months, and specifically ever since the pandemic started. The external debt has increased a lot, and right now it is around 150,000 million US dollars. So it's increasing, and right now it's already really huge. So these three reasons, among many others, of course, were the ones the government used for saying, yes, we need this tax reform. But what is this tax reform implied? Well, one of the most controversial things was the increasing of the IVA, which is the value added tax in the country, and its application to basic services and goods. So before, we didn't tax main goods as food, for example, meat, rice, fish, eggs, fuel, but now the government wanted to tax these goods that were part of daily life of people here in Colombia. So that was really controversial, because at the end we would have been paying much more money for basic stuff we needed in our life. And a very controversial one was taxing death. So you might wonder, what do you mean by taxing death? Well, one of the proposals of this tax reform was to put a tax, IVA, to all the arrangements when someone died. So if someone died, then the people arranging that someone's death would have need to pay a lot of taxes for those arrangements, which was really crazy in this context. Another of the reforms was demanding an income tax to people earning 656 US dollars per month in a country where the minimum wage is 248 US dollars. It was really crazy, because they were considering that people gaining $600 and above were already middle class and actually upper class, which was crazy, because with $600, of course, converted into Colombian pesos, you can't do much, but they wanted to ask much more taxes to the people in this class. Another very controversial one was the taxing pensions. So people gaining pensions during their retirement, they would have need to start paying some taxes. So these were some of the main reforms, and that these converged in a national strike called by many sectors, by unions, students, peasants, workers, indigenous, like everyone in the country were so worried, because this would have touched all of us. So this national strike was called for the 28th of April, and it happened. It was a huge, huge, huge national strike some weeks ago. Many people on the streets, in the cities, in the countryside, but especially in the cities, in Bogota, Cali, Medellin, Popayán, many parts of the country were going out, fighting for. So that's where I'm going to tell you like the aims of this national strike. The first one was, of course, overturning this tax reform, and the second one was demanding the resignation of the finance minister, which was one of the main sponsors of this tax reform. These two things were accomplished. So that was like a huge thing that happened for us here. But the problem is that these demonstrations and the strike itself continued, and many people abroad, of course, like not knowing what the context is here, might wonder, but why is this still happening in Colombia? Why people are still demonstrating even though the reform was withdrawn or overturned? And actually the finance minister, he quit the day after the government said, yeah, this tax reform is not going anymore. So here you can see some pictures of the national strike. It was really massive. It was really diverse. So there were indigenous people, students, like everyone, many people, because a lot of us are affected by that, right? So here are some indigenous peoples in Sierra Nevada, Santa Marta, some pictures in the cities. This one was really impressive. This happened actually last Saturday in Bogota, in one of the most iconic monuments in the city. There were thousands of people, which was so great. But so that's where I'm gonna tell you, why do people keep on protesting? The short answer is that the tax reform was just the trigger. We live in a context, in a country, where it's not the tax reform itself, but it's so many other things. It's the whole background that actually make our lives precarious and make our lives be violented all the time. There's a lot of human rights violation, a lot of inequality, gender violence, racism, unemployment. There's a government, Ivan Duque's government, the one ruling right now, which is boycotting the peace agreements, for example, that we signed in 2016 with the biggest armed group in Colombia, FARC. So there's this whole context that is basically connected to a state negligence. So people are tired, we are exhausted of this government, and there's no longer trust. Because they said no more tax reform, no more this finance minister, but people keep on going to the streets, keep on fighting. So there's no longer trust with the government, there's no channels of communication. So, and for finishing, this intervention, I want to raise this part of the debate because this is something we're going to talk during the whole panel, and it's the violent response of the government and the state and its different institutions, named the police, the military forces, towards the people demonstrating. There's a lot of violence right now in the country. It's really worrying. And now we're having it in the cities where actually that violence has not been that manifested. Violence has been much more felt in the countryside because of the armed conflict. But during this situation, the cities have been facing that violence as well, that direct violence, structural violence always, but that direct violence itself, nowadays, much more. And here are some numbers I wanted to show you, and then we can start asking some questions to our panelists. So according to Temblores is a very nice NGO supervising and reporting everything that's happening right now in the country. Here are some of the numbers from the 28th of April, when the big national strike started, until the 18th of May. So, for example, there has been 2,387 cases of police brutality, 43 victims of homicides allegedly committed by the police, 146 cases of firearm shootings by the police, 18 victims of sexual assault by the public force, most of them, if not all of them, women. So after this, I would like to start with our panelists, but first I'm gonna introduce them a bit. So we have Natalia Chavez Monroy, Women, Peace and Security Program Coordinator in LIMPAL, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom section in Colombia. She is a feminist woman who has been working on development cooperation in Colombia for the last 10 years, specifically on women's rights and their social, political, and economic strengthening. She has also promoted economic models centered on care works and respectful of natural environments in territories. We have Oscar Barajas, board member and activist of Peaceworks in Sweden, acting director for Latin America Grupperna. His job entails permanent interaction with the CLOC Vía Campesina, Coordinadora Latinoamericana de Organizaciones del Campo, member organizations like FENSOAGRO, Coordinador Nacional Agrario, among others in Colombia. He has a wide professional and personal background in the peasant movements in the country and in the armed conflict. And Diana Romero Marin, pre-service teacher from UIS Public University, Industrial University of Santander, language teacher who has been working in the educational field for 6 years, promoting opportunities and equality for children, teenagers, and adults through creative and critical thinking. She has also participated in social programs as a volunteer with different communities addressing social issues and the construction of a peace culture. So welcome all of you. Thank you so much for being here. And now we're going to start with the questions. So I would like to start with Natalia. And I would like to ask you, what is the intersection you see between a post-conflict scenario, a national strike, and an ongoing pandemic? And why is there such a violent response from the state to the demonstrations?
Thank you, Alejandra. Thank you so much for this introduction. So I was quite moved about the pictures you have shown us. So thanks again for this scenario, for showing this scenario. So first of all, we would like to thank Multicultural Sweden for the invitation to this conversation about what is currently happening here in Colombia. I am part of Limpal, Colombia, of the team of Limpal, Colombia. And this is our acronym in Spanish. In English is WILP. That is, it's a global movement of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And we are a feminist, pacifist, and anti-militarist organization that works for peace building through women empowerment and their social and political participation. So we wanted to say that for these last decades in Colombia, the order established by the patriarchal system and the neoliberal economic model have been deepened by an institutional and economic and political crisis, enriching a few people and expelling the broader Colombia population into poverty and misery. So these precarious measures taken by the government to mitigate the pandemic have triggered an unprecedented, massive, peaceful and diverse mobilization that stay alive in this resistance right now. However, for the last 3 weeks, people have been faced a widespread militarization, a brutal repression, and the use of excessive force against them, against us. So especially threatening young people. So this crisis is not new, as you said, and is not the tax reform is not the trigger of this situation also. It was in addition of another reasons that I'm going to say right now. So this crisis is not new. It's being fed by the poor implementation of the peace agreement in their territories at national level, but also local level, where social and political participation was one of the fundamental points of peace agreement, and to develop the plans, the local plans and the local policies. So we can forget that the incorporation of the gender approach and the participation of women in this agreement in Colombia became a war reference for other nations and for other peace agreement. Furthermore, it's important to highlight that since the signing of the peace agreements, 970 social leaders and human rights defenders and 270 former FARC combatants have been assassinated here in Colombia. So this is another trigger for the social protests, and all these points are the real causes of this social outrage. So in this context, the discomfort of the society that demands reforms has become evident. The response of armed forces to protesters, both peaceful and even violent, has been strongly questioned by human rights organizations right now. This violent repression by the police and the military forces for us is a strategy to control the protest against inequality, poverty, lack of opportunities, unemployment, corruption, and structural violence. Likewise, it responds to the confusion over the persistence demonstrators have had. A reform, we claim that a reform of the defense of the security sector is needed to act according to the society that is in transition toward peace. So this idea to reduce the force for the state is to show, maybe for them to show weakness, but it's precisely for us the opposite. The state has a duty to protect the protesters' life, and even if they are not in peaceful. On the other hand, it is also important to highlight that we are in a pre-electoral context here this year, right? And next year we are going to elect Congress and elect the president. So this moment also requires a reflection process, a reflection exercise as a society and as our responsibility as citizens.
Thank you so much, Natalia. And before asking you, Oscar, I would like to remind you all, the audience, that you can ask questions in the chat, and at the end we will raise them to the panelists. And thank you, Natalia, for your response. Now, I would like to ask Oscar, something very similar to what I asked to Natalia, but specifically about this link with the armed conflict. So do you see a link between the historical armed conflict in the country and now like in this post-conflict scenario and the current situation?
The simple answer is yes. And as you said before, Alejandra, what we see now is direct violence against the civil population in the cities and also in the countryside. But we could also talk about structural violence. There has been all the time in Colombia. There has been the issues of poverty, the issue of unequal land distribution. And this structural violence has always led to direct violence. Not in the cities, as we are seeing now, but more in the countryside and smaller urban centers. So there has always been violence in Colombia. There has always been conflicts, especially around land distribution. There has always been political violence as well. The thing is that we have not been able to see that because I mean the conflict traces back to the Spanish colonization, and we see the same unjust the same injustices now as we did 500 years ago. So the issue of structural violence has always been there. And what we see now is a reaction to centuries of oppression and injustices. So there is, of course, a link there. And what we see is just a consequence of all that has been happening in Colombia. That has to do with colonization, with patriarchal structures in society, capitalism. And during the last 30 years, these neoliberal policies that have been dominant in the political discourse in Colombia. These open market ideas that led to millions and millions of dollars coming into the economy, but just in a few hands. So we see also this at the moment that people are reacting to this unequal distribution of land and money that is just concentrated in a few banks, in a few companies. So yeah, I mean, you could talk about FARC, and you could talk about the guerrillas, the paramilitaries, but those groups came also as a reaction to centuries of inequalities. I mean, what we see now is not something that has to do with the paramilitaries. The paramilitaries is actually a consequence of structural violence that has always been in Colombia.
Thank you, Oscar. Yes, I think it's very interesting what Natalia and Oscar were raising, because it tells us as well that this thing that is happening is an intersection of so many power systems that come together and that generate these kind of situations. That's why I was telling you this is just like when it exploded. This is when people went to the streets. But the thing is that it's so many other things coming together to cause this situation. Now, I would like to ask Diana, especially about the students' movement, because we have seen throughout these weeks and throughout this national strike that the students' movement is one of the strongest one, and one of the ones that is actually the foundation of this whole strike. So Diana, why is the students' movement throughout the country one of the biggest and strongest ones in the current uprisings, and what are their main contributions?
Okay, thank you, Alejandra. So first, it is worth highlighting that the students' movement has accomplished major matters throughout the history of Colombia. In this regard, since 2018, when we were protesting against the underfunding of higher public education, the student movement has been thinking of ways of articulating nationally and combining efforts. The movement has presented a solid front in this strike because of the need to raise our voices with all that is happening, and because we are also seeking for an structural reform, as some of you have mentioned. And mostly because we have lived closer the police brutality, people who are disappeared and who have died or have been killed are students mostly, and that moves us, that moves the movement to keep protesting for their lives and for their voices that were shut. Especially also because during the current government, the education has been disregarded, and there is an enormous gap regarding access to education that has increased during the pandemic, and that has been evidenced during the pandemic, especially for the poor populations who have not been able to have quality of education. And also because there are no opportunities in the country to have professional development. There is no investment to education nor to research. And young people just want to be able to study and work in their country, to have the option and to be able to choose, and not to be forced to migrate or settle due to lack of possibilities. And regarding the main contributions, I think those are to care for and to join forces with other social sectors, also to be willing to carry out or promote academic, political, and pedagogical events for others to be informed about the meaningful concerns that are happening in the country. And furthermore, to stand up for our rights, taking significant part in the human rights commissions, because these are formed with students also, because other entities that should defend us are failing at doing it. And finally, and more importantly, to resist. Students, together with popular neighborhoods, are the ones who are striking day by day in the streets and in the cities, thus to resist despite police brutality and the mismanagement of the governors is the main contribution.
Thank you so much, Diana. And now that you mentioned this last thing, yesterday actually La Silla Vacía, which is like kind of an independent media here, they actually launched an article or a study where they say that these 3 weeks of protests that have been happening have been in the shoulders mostly of people between 14 and 25 years old. And most of them are students. That's why this debate is really important in this regard. And now I would like to ask Natalia again, what is the role now of the feminist movements in the current national strike, and why is it important to mainstream that anti-militarist and feminist approach?
Yes, well, I wanted to say that in this situation, in this national strike right now, young people are struggling for their dignity. They have nothing but their dignity. So that situation, coupled with the deepening of an economic crisis aggravated by the pandemic, where women have to assume an overload in care work, and where cases of violence against women in the private sphere, I mean their homes, have increased. This has been another of the causes of the indignity, of the outrage. So 3 weeks later, after the beginning of the national strike, we have been witnesses of the repression by the state against the demonstrators and the militarization of these streets in almost all capital cities in Colombia. For example, Cali was one of the epicenters of that situation here, of the demonstrators, but also of the state violence. So I wanted to highlight some numbers that you have already, Alejandra, said about the NGO temblores, but I'm going to skip these numbers. But yes, we want to emphasize that last numbers you said about the 18 women victims of sexual violence by the security forces. So for us, these are not just data, but they are people, and most of them young people whose human rights have been violated. So as a feminist, pacifist, and anti-militarist organization, we have rejected the excessive use of weapons by security forces to repress the demonstrations. We have rejected the sexual violence against women, the militarization of the streets, the censorship of alternative media, the misrepresentation of information by traditional media also, and the complete lack of accountability of the institutions. As part of our work, we have studied about the concept of human security that has not been applied by the military forces, neither the police. So we reclaim feminist human security according to the experience of women that are in our territories, and the proposals that they have built related to this, to what is security for us, to what security means for women, and the current social protest we think is not an external situation for these reflections. So for these reasons, we have urged the Colombian government to ensure a wide range of civil society actors, groups, and organizations with different point of view that can be included in this social dialogue, but also negotiations about new policies and new reforms that must be in line in Colombia with Colombian human rights obligations. Also, we want to government to undertake gender and human rights impact assessments in the process of planning and guarantee the tax policies, for example, and also other economic and social processes, taking into account the context of COVID-19 and also this impact in women also. And we also demand to the government of Ivan Duque to demilitarize the streets and dismantle the riot forces that we call here as SMAT, Escuadrón Móvil Antidisturbios. On the other hand, we want to vindicate the critical role of young people, but also of women that have had in this protest their massive, active, and creative participation that they have carried out from the outrage due to the decisions taken by this government in economic, political, and social matters. So they have maintained the leadership in peaceful demonstrations nowadays.
Thank you, Natalia. And now, in the spirit of understanding that all these power systems and all of these things that are happening, this structural violence and direct violence is directed to the groups that have been minorities historically as women and now as peasants, for example. I would like to ask Oscar what has been now the role of the peasants movement in the country in the ongoing demonstrations.
Well, yes, peasants have been protesting for centuries, I would say, and there has been mobilizations actually all around the country for a few years now, since all the problems after the implementation of the peace accord came about 4 years ago. I mean, all the problems with implementation, the violence against social leaders, violence against indigenous peoples, and all this. That has led to a reaction from these movements. They have been trying to get attention and to get policies that benefit the countryside, because like I said before, there has been free market economy. There has been a move to a free market economy during the last 30 years. And this move has been very, very dramatic for the countryside, because all the opportunities, all the money has stayed in the cities and in a few hands. So this free market has benefited a few people, and it has not benefited people that are not part of the global economy, like peasants, like indigenous peoples. So they are now taking part in the mobilizations, but they have been taking part in mobilizations for years now. It's just that they get attention now because they are part of a much bigger movement, with the middle class also taking part in the protest, and with all the social media and all the attention that the protests are having right now. So yeah, I mean, there is a huge issue. Like I said before, the land distribution has always been a problem in Colombia. It has affected peasants, it has affected indigenous peoples. When you talk about numbers in Colombia, when you talk about social leaders and human rights activists being killed in Colombia, when you look at the numbers, the majority are people from the countryside, indigenous peoples and peasants. And when you look at the number of people that are internally displaced, about 8 million people in Colombia, then also the majority are people from the countryside. And when you look at people living in economically deprived areas in the cities, then you see peasants and you see indigenous peoples as well. So that they are a huge part of the population that are facing the consequences of a free market economy that is not working. And they have been mobilized, and they have been trying to put forward an agenda with proposals. And yeah, well, it's easy to talk about these groups of people as victims, but they are actually political actors that are coming with ideas, that are coming with political proposals. When you see the peace accord and the first chapter in the peace accord about land distribution and all this, then you see a lot of proposals actually coming from the peasant and indigenous movements, such as a move towards agroecology, a move towards food sovereignty. And these are all being and initiatives coming from these movements. And they are trying to make it happen in the context of the peace process, but it's really difficult because the peace process, as progressive as it is, has the limitation of the free market economy that is there, and the free trade agreements. And actually, people here, some of you students could actually write a thesis about free trade agreements in Colombia versus the peace accord, and how possible it is to have a peace accord in the context of a free market economy. It's really difficult because you live outside the majority of the population, and you don't take into consideration alternative proposals like the ones I talked about, food sovereignty, agroecology, and all this, that are actually part of the first chapter in the peace accord. So yeah, they have been mobilizing. They are not just victims, they want to be seen as political actors, and it's very important that I say that many times, because in Sweden and in development cooperation, we tend to see them as victims, helpless victims that are not able to act and to come with proposals. And it's not the case in Colombia, and it's not the case anywhere in the world. Peasant and indigenous movements are an active part in the political processes, not only in Colombia, but in the whole world.
Thank you so much, Oscar. And now, Diana, last time when we were talking, you were telling me that you have been working with some other teachers towards a proposal on how to talk to children about the current situation in the country. And I found it super interesting because we also tend to take kids' agency away from them, like if they were invisible in the whole context. So I would like to ask you, what is this proposal about, and what have you been talking around it?
Yes, so along with other educators, we have been planning and implementing a strategy that leaves room in the classroom to listen to young voices and to recognize and outraise their role in society, as you were telling. Because our society gives little importance to what children and young people have to say, especially regarding topics like politics, and we must acknowledge their crucial part in participating and in constructing a better society as citizens. And we want to start in the classroom just by listening and providing a safe space for kids and teens to share how all of this situation makes them feel due of the information the young population has access to and the disproportionate violence that we live in, the first step should be to understand how they are experiencing this, how them and their families are living this and dealing with it, because they are also dealing with the pandemic, virtual education, and possibly with economic crisis. So mental health is an essential matter to address during this time. In this respect, some teenagers have expressed in the media that it's very hard for them to focus in class and to keep up with the academic demands, while there are reports of deaths, rape, and violence in the streets. They just want their teachers not to ignore what is going on and not to pretend like nothing is happening, because that's normalizing the situation. Teachers must address these issues and allow students to express their thoughts. That's what we are building with other educators. And we also think it's important to address important topics like civil and human rights that can be studied from all levels and that make students aware of the rights that are not being fulfilled, that people are protesting as a right also for those rights that are not being fulfilled. And that they are aware, kids are children and teenagers are aware of the injustice and inequality that the country faces, because sometimes some sectors tend to neglect it. And how we take part in the classroom is by questioning them, listening to them, and providing a class where they can dream and discuss how to construct the country they want to live in. And it is important to involve them in the debate of the national panorama, because they have a clear, they read the national panorama and they know what they want for their country and for the world. So we owe them to listen to them and to accompany in the process of constructing what they want. And also because we all have been taught to avoid discussing topics like politics and religion, because we should avoid conflict, but instead we should be taught to have discussions that are respectful and civilized about important issues. And finally, education is important in these issues, because education can either create critical and creative minds that understand their realities and their context and aim at transforming it, or create useful beings for the market that just want to comply with the system. So it is crucial to change the way Colombian education works, because we have some social dynamics that have been taking place for a long time. Some generations grew up not having the opportunity to study or discuss the history of Colombia in the classrooms, or not the parts that matter, at least. I grew up in the middle of the Colombian conflict, and I was not able to study or discuss it, or not what was going on or why was going on. I came to find out about the conflict years later for my own, while other kids my age or teenagers my age were living the context and the conflict in their flesh. So we have the opportunity to change that, to educate for peace, that it means not just studying history and the peace agreements, but learning how to construct a culture of peace, how to have healthy relationships with others and with the environment as well, and to break a cycle of a violent culture we have been inherited. So we need to understand our context and want to transform it, and the education is the perfect field to foster it.
Beautiful, thank you so much. And yes, I'm sure we have a lot of things in mind, and this is just like a very general panorama we're giving you. But now I would like to ask one last question to all of the panelists, so each of you can give us your thoughts on it, and then we will go with the audience questions. So the question is related to, why do you think, the three of you, it is important to raise awareness internationally about what's happening in Colombia and in general, because we see there's a lot of things happening in Palestine, in India, in Sudan, everywhere, like the world is on fire, especially in our global south. So why do you think it's important to talk about these things, to take this to the international arena, not just in terms of knowledge, but also in terms of actions? So who would like to start?
Okay, I want to start if you are okay. Okay, Oscar.
Yeah, well, like I can start if you want. Yeah, well, I mean, we live in a globalized world, and I have been talking a lot about the free market economy, and the free market economy is a global economy. So everything that we are seeing in Colombia right now has to do with policies in Sweden and Europe. And I mentioned the free trade agreements, that's an example. I could also talk about the pension funds in Sweden that are investing in companies that are violating human rights in Colombia at the moment. I could give you a few examples. In Colombia, we have the biggest coal mine in the world, called El Cerrejón, in the north of the country. And the three coal mining companies that own the mine, all receive money from Swedish pension funds. The money that we in Sweden get when we retire is invested in companies that are at the moment violating human rights in Colombia. So there are Swedish interests in the context of Colombia and in all that is happening in the country right now. So we have very much in Sweden a responsibility with all that is happening there, as we are part of a global economy, and Sweden has interest in the region. And that's Sweden, a very small country when you compare it to the US and France and all the huge economies in the world. But we in Sweden have the interest in Colombia. You have also I mean, if you, I could talk the whole day about Sweden. You have in the same coal mine, you have Vattenfall, which is the biggest public company in Sweden. You have the pension funds investing in the companies owning the mine, and you have Vattenfall buying coal and using it not in Sweden but in Germany. So the issue of the mine in Colombia is actually has more attention in Germany than what it does in Sweden, because the coal is not coming to Sweden. And then you have yeah, I mean the whole Swedish development cooperation. On the one hand, you are investing money in companies and things that are making it difficult for people to have a living in Colombia. And on the other hand, you are giving money to the peace process and to human rights and to democracy and to development and all this. So I could say something about Sweden, and that is that there are clear double standards when it comes to Sweden and Sweden's interest in Colombia. But I could talk about and give you examples the whole day, and I know it's not my intention. It's just I want to say that even though we are in a very small country up in the north of the world, we actually have a lot of interest in Colombia, and in other countries. We are all interconnected. So we have a responsibility, and we have to pressure the Swedish government so that they understand that what they are doing is affecting people on the streets right now in Colombia. The violence, the paramilitaries, all these groups are benefiting from mining, are benefiting from Swedish interests that are present in Colombia right now. And then, but we could have a debate also about this, the plans that the Duque government has to buy new airplanes, these fighting airplanes. And Sweden is one of the is one of the countries that are trying to sell system weapons to Colombia and airplanes. So there is that. You give money to the peace accord, but you are also trying to sell weapons to a country that is killing children, that is, right now killing activists on the streets. So yeah, there are. We have a responsibility, and we have to talk about Colombia, and we have to talk about Sweden's role in the context of Colombia, what is happening right now in the country.
Thank you, Natalia, and then Diana, please.
Yes, thank you, Alejandra, and thank you, Oscar, for saying this, because we are in the same line. I think the situation is important to make it visible in all over the world. I mean, as you said, Alejandra, there are a situation, a really extremely dangerous and grave situation in Palestine, but also I want to emphasize what is happening in Chile, for example, that maybe for us, they are showing us the path. No, so we can reivindicate the democracy here also. We want to ask for the solidarity of people. We want that international community to embrace the women, the youth, the indigenous, and also peasant movements claims, because we want to be heard. We want that international community to carry out rigorous monitoring and reporting of the critical situation of human rights here in Colombia and their violations, but also to activate protocols for assistance and communication and information of the events that are being silenced by this government and also by the traditional media, to demand also the authorities to conduct a prompt, impartial, independent, and a transparent investigation into all cases of excessive and unnecessary use of force against demonstrators, which has led people being killed, injured, and disappear. So what you can do as a community, as an international community, as a social organization also, so we think that you can activate, for example, human rights clauses of the free trade agreements, and social organization, like social organization are demanding, for example, in Spain, governments initially in the European Union are now globally can activate the essential elements of human rights clauses in order to suspend trade preferences and agreements with Colombia right now, which is clearly in violation of human rights and democracy. You also can ask your government to have coherence between commercial and development cooperation policies, for example, and revise the military cooperation with Colombia. For example, Sweden cooperates with Colombia through its agency, SIDA, to strengthen peace, to sustainable development, to humanitarian aid also. But at the same time, Sweden is one of the largest exporters of arms right now. So this is for us not just a product exporter, but it's like a war doctrine exporter for us. so you can ensure that your resources, your public resources from your taxes are invested in care and protection of life instead of increasing the resources toward the war and the violence. And lastly, we ask you to focus on the critical situation of women who have been sexually abused and assaulted during this national strike. Sweden is one of the most important cooperation actors regarding gender policy, regarding women human rights. So we want your backing in advancing the protection of those rights of those situations. Thank you.
Okay, I would like to add to that, apart from what Natalia and Oscar already said, that is very important that others abroad know the situation and the accurate information of what is going on. There is also Colombian people living abroad who need access to this information because they have loved ones living here and they want to know how to help. And the organizations also abroad want to know how to help Colombia. Also because internationally, as Alejandra was saying at the beginning, the situation in Colombia is read in terms of the government granting what the protest asked for. Yes, so it started as a petition to revoke the tax reform and it was dropped. Then Carrasquilla minister quit, and the same with the health reform. But with all that is behind those concessions, because as Alejandra said, we cannot trust them. The reality is that what people are now fighting for is the defense of human rights that are being infringed and have been infringed for long, for the corruption that is evidence, also for the stigmatization of the social protest, and overall for dignified living conditions for all. The reality is that the government is not listening to the people. There are dialogue tables, yes, but they are established with a committee that does not represent completely the interest of people, especially of the people who are protesting. Besides, they are trying to negotiate aspects that are non-negotiable, that are people demands, like the way police and military forces are perceived. Also, I think it's important because the conception of Colombia on account to the previous government was as a country that constructs peace or constructor of peace. The peace agreement brought several benefits. Violence was not over with it, and the country kept being extremely unequal. And the visibility of this social protest is relevant internationally because it brings to light the real situation of systematic violence and the violation of human rights that is not today's news and that is happening now in the streets and the cities, but has been happening in the countrysides for long.
Thank you so much. I would like to ask something very brief of what you said, and then we can go on with the questions. And it's that my personal experience in Europe as well has shown me how, and in general my studies, how Euro-centered the world still is. And that's something we should all be aware of, because I have noticed myself how a lot we as Latin Americans know about Europe, about their history, but how little Europeans know about us or Americans or these power poles in the world. So I think that's also a very important thing to take into account in these discussions. Yeah, so now we can go on with the questions, Matilda. I think we need to select some of them because I don't know if that would be too long, but yeah.
Exactly. Yes, thank you so much. It's been really interesting to hear all of you, and there have been several questions from and a lot of good comments as well, so everybody can just go in as well and just look at some of the comments. But one here from Alejandra Figueiredo is what impact would you think the national mobilization will have on the upcoming electoral race in 2022? There someone who wants to just jump on that question?
I could say something, but I'm in Sweden, so I would like maybe comments afterwards from Diana and Natalia. But what I can say is I hope to see new people, new faces taking part in the political process, and not only on I don't want to the same old discourse about right and left. I want to see new proposals, new ideas coming forward. And I see a lot of students, young people, indigenous peoples, people from the countryside, peasants that are taking part in the negotiations, that are also taking part in the debates and the mobilizations. So I really hope that these people make it into the formal political process, and that they actually come to Congress, and that they, who knows, if they are able, if they can take the presidency, it would be great to see new faces. That's kind of me dreaming, because I know that the corruption, and I know that the elections are very corrupt, and the mafias and the paramilitary, they have the control of the whole political process. So I know that it's difficult for people from these mobilizations and the activists that are taking part in that they actually get formal political power in the form of a place in the Congress, for instance, because they have to defeat powerful forces that are still there. But I really hope.
I would like to add also that there is a lot that can happen in the elections we cannot truly know, because we have voted historically out of fear, and historically out of we're tired of one party, so we will vote for the other. So what can happen is that, as this is all so recent, people can just lead their decision based on fear, whatever they're afraid of, because there is also a lot of people that is afraid of the opposition and of the left. So people can vote out of what their personal interests are regarding what is happening right now. And other Colombian things that are very important can maybe not be as important. So what politicians are going to maybe use is just these social protests and these social mobilizations to try to say how they will solve it, and then Colombians can say what they feel like should happen. I will also hope that people voted because they want the best for Colombia. And I think a lot of people has opened their eyes with this current situation and this current government. There have been some periods of time where we have, or where people have voted for the same party and for the politicians that the same person says to vote for. And maybe that is not going to happen next time, but we cannot guarantee that the people's vote are going to count, because last elections we didn't even know if they were legal. There were some cases of, like bad things on the counting of votes, and some oppositions have launched programs like, vote with your signature and your foot and your fingerprints, but that is not approved. Most of the things that the opposition proposes are not approved. So we don't know what is going to happen. Anything can happen. And if maybe the opposition wins, that can also lead to a social crisis. So there is a lot that can happen, but hopefully we can try to vote responsibly and both, because there is also a big part of the population who doesn't vote.
Yes, I agree with that, what Oscar and Diana have said. I just want to emphasize in 2 points that in many ways we have to overcome these polarizations and we have to work on this. Yes. So I think, as said before, we want to work deepening our responsibility as citizens in the vote responsibility also, either if it's right wing or left wing, but to be aware about this situation, to be aware about this citizenship also, and to make visible other spaces, other groups also. Hopefully, we are going to have a Congress maybe a little bit different. I'm not sure about this, but for us is to, our work for us is to deepen in that reflection, to deepen in that responsibility as citizens right now, because this is a way to how to improve the democracy in this country.
Yes. If we continue to looking at the future, we have one question from Arna, who is talking about the police violence. And after such a violent response by the police, how can trust be built between the people and the security forces? And that's also related to the future for Colombia.
Is it directed to anyone?
Yes, to anyone in the panel who feels like they want to talk about the police force. And
yeah, well, I could start then. I mean, it's really difficult because people, especially in areas that has been affected by the conflict and direct violence for a long period of time, they have a hard time trusting the police and trusting people in uniforms, because it doesn't matter if it's the guerrillas, the paramilitaries, the police. There is always violence there, and the police. I mean, the doctrine that the police has. You have to clean the police, and starting by the ideology that is being taught in police academies in Colombia. I mean, a few days ago, there was in the news that a neo-Nazi from Chile was actually teaching at a military school in Colombia. I mean, and you have this in the open that you invite. I mean, people with a very anti-democratic ideology, and they are teaching the police. So it's not a surprise that the police are reacted in the way that they are doing now. So you have to start by actually, looking at the whole ideology that the police has, and you have to change it from deep inside. I mean, basic things, human rights. You have to teach them about democracy, about the rule of law. I mean, it sounds like very, very simple, but it's there. I mean, they don't have it. They have their ideology is to kill. Their ideology is to protect the interest of the very few, the banks, and all the ones that are benefiting from the market economy. That's it. I mean, they are not there to protect the people. They are there to protect the interests of the very few. That's it. By any means necessary. That's violence.
Yes, I think it's really difficult to build trust to the military forces or the police right now, because of the response of the institutions, because of the response of the government to this national strike and to these demonstrators. So it's like a strategy of fear, you know, and this is very aligned with the doctrine of war for us. So right now for us, this is a great opportunity, for example, to reivindicate a change, a reform to the security sector, to the yes, to the police, to the military forces, but not just training this kind of forces, this kind of actors, not just training in human rights. That is really important also. But for example, to question our commerce, our trade, our arms trade at international level. So this is a great moment to make this situation visible. Because of this also, because of this situation, all countries have to be involved in this discussion, in this debate about security, forces, about security sector, but not just in Colombia, in all over the world.
Do you want to add something, Diana?
I think they pretty much covered it. Just for us to reconcile, there needs to be willingness from both parties, just from the police forces and from the population.
Yes. Then I will hand it over to you, Alejandra, again, because we are running out of time. So unfortunately, we can't raise too much more.
Thank you so much, Matilda, and thank you all for your questions. We had a lot. I'm sorry we can't answer them all, but this panel was programmed until 1:20, 8:20, so now it's the time. So we would like to close now. First, to thank all of our panelists for their great views and opinions on what's happening here. To all of the team, Multicultural, to FUF, to Peaceworks, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for attending our panel. It was great to moderate it, and I hope it was great for you as well to attend it. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to say something very short, and it's just, I mean, even if you are in Sweden or anywhere in the world, get involved in civil society. Get involved in Peaceworks, get involved in FUF, get involved in Latin America group, and just take the opportunity and make sure to be there and take part in the political debate. Even though we are in Sweden, we have to address these issues. As I said, these are problems that are globalized, and we have to take active part in these discussions.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more.